What has happened, everybody? James Hancock here, and back to review episode 6 of season 2 of House of the Dragon. And sadly, we only have 2 more episodes to go before this season draws to a close, which has me wondering which event is going to be the season finale. Because I know people are tired of hearing certain episodes being described as like slow burn episodes or rebuilding episodes, but basically, you have certain key events throughout the Dance of the Dragons, and obviously they will use one of them to wrap up season 2. But there are 2 major contenders, which I think might have the chance to exceed or at least match episode 4 of the season, which remains my favorite episode of the season. But all I can say is be patient, but there was some cool stuff here in this latest episode, but I totally understand if someone's like, give me some goddamn battles, give me some goddamn dragons and some carnage, etc. and so forth. But there has been some good news as of late for House of the Dragon because it had initially a little bit of a slow start. But according to the Nielsen ratings, which usually run about a month behind, so this will be for the period of June 17th to 23rd. But apparently House of the Dragon has hit its highest mark to date. According to The Hollywood Reporter, the series racked up 1.23 billion minutes of viewing on Max for the week after its season 2 premiere, and including a few hours of viewing for the second episode on June 23rd. And as good as that news might be, it would probably be even better if they included the data from traditional linear cable, because there are some people out there who still watch House of the Dragon just on good old-fashioned HBO on cables. So even if this season's had some big episodes, some down episodes, etc. and so forth, at least it's developing a larger following. It's growing in popularity, which bodes well for basically being able to wrap up the Dance of the Dragons, as well as shows like Night of the Seven Kingdoms and so on and so forth. So let's hope that all these new audience members are rewarded with a big, fat, juicy, epic climax in 2 weeks' time, one that'll be discussed and, basically debated for years to come. But I guess let me be very careful in my wording. There are 2 possible contenders that would be fitting season 2 finales. One's a storyline involving Daemon, and I feel like Daemon's been so underutilized this whole season, and he's my favorite character. The fact that he's had kind of a weak season has been a lingering source of frustration, but they could stick the landing if they use one of his major story beats. But another alternative or another strong option would be a storyline involving the blockade that's been affecting King's Landing. Obviously, they've been planting a lot of seeds about the blockade, but there was a line of dialogue in this episode where they're talking about trying to form an alliance with the Triarch, and the Triarch are the free cities across the Narrow Sea, Lys, Myr, and Tyrosh. I think I'm saying those names correctly, but there's a possible, major event involving those cities as well, which could be fascinating. But what went down this episode? We see that a lot of pieces on the chessboard are moving. Jason Lannister, who is the twin brother of Tywin Lannister, he is on the march. We saw how, for whatever reason, while they're on the march, they keep lions in cages. It's like, are you going to use those lions in battle? I don't know how useful they would be, but anyway, the Lannisters are all about their lions, so I guess it is good branding for their family. But we see that they're staying at this really cool-looking fortress called the Golden Tooth, and they're waiting for Aemond and Vhagar to join them before they will even consider charging on the Riverlands. And we see how in his own small council, Aemond is absolutely irate about being summoned like an errand boy by the Lannisters, and he basically orders Tywin then and there to form the alliance that I mentioned before with the Triarchy. And that's a slight variation from what we saw in the book, because in the book, Otto Hightower, right after Aegon becomes king, Otto starts sending letters like basically all over the planet looking for alliances, and that is one of the seeds that bears fruit. But anyway, minor change, but they just want to show Aemond, basically being king and making things happen. But as loath as I am to admit it, Aemond might be pushing Daemon aside as my favorite character in the show. Not my favorite character in the story, because as written in Fire and Blood, Daemon's a bad motherfucker. But in the show, it's Aemond is a bad motherfucker, and perhaps he's a little headstrong. Perhaps he thinks he's a little immune to being killed. I mean, once again, he might be riding a big goddamn dragon, but if an arrow catches him through the eye, he'll be just as dead as if he were on the ground. But we see that he's ordering Cole to march on Harrenhal, and Cole's like, we don't really have the men to march on Harrenhal. As you saw, a few weeks ago on this show, we lost a lot of guys, but from Aemond's point of view, if they can get to Harrenhal quickly, then Daemon won't be able to marshal all the forces of the Riverlands, and he'll be an easy target, so on and so forth. And as far as his future face-off with Daemon and Caraxes is concerned, Aemon does not seem to be concerned one bit about that contest. But Aemon made one major decision in this episode, which might earn him a few enemies or lose him a few fans, but he kicks his mom, Alicent, off the small council, and he basically says, look, you served my father well, but he's not around anymore. I'm the king, or I'm at least the king regent, so on and so forth. And she basically takes a long, hard look at him and basically asks him, like, haven't you taken enough revenge for the indignities that you suffered throughout your childhood? But obviously, Aemon has still got a serious chip on his shoulder from having his eye slashed out of his face by his I guess his half siblings or his cousins, or anyway, by his family a long time ago. But even if Aemon is a little bit villainous, I just like seeing a Targaryen doing badass shit. Targaryens, they are a family of conquerors. They're a family of warriors. They're sometimes half crazy. Sometimes they're a little incestuous. But the reason we like the Targaryens is because we like watching them take over cities or take over countries or whatever the case might be. So bring on Aemon in a state of total command. I eagerly look forward to any and all battles in which he might participate. But speaking of future battles, we see that Rhaenyra and Jace are moving full speed ahead on trying to recruit riders this episode. They're trying to find riders for Vermithor, Silverwing, and Seasmoke. Vermithor and Silverwing were the dragons for the old king, King Jaehaerys, who was king before Viserys, and Silverwing was the dragon for his wife, Alysanne, I think is how you say her name. And obviously Seasmoke was the dragon for Laenor Velaryon, who was the temporary husband for Rhaenyra before they cooked up that scheme where he could basically sail off with his boyfriend to participate in sea battles for the rest of his days. But Seasmoke definitely needs a rider, and they've all rejected Rhaena. And Rhaena would love nothing more than to become a dragon rider, but she's stuck up in the Eyrie with her little half-brothers. But more on Rhaena in a sec, because there's one scene involving her which has prompted me to have a theory about the direction of the show and how they're going to handle the adaptation. But I'm going to save that theory for the end of the video because it is spoiler related, and I'm definitely, like, even for people who don't mind spoilers about the episode, they might not want spoilers about stuff from the book. So anyway, I'm going to tackle that at the very end, so stay tuned for that little theory. But getting back to finding riders for Vermithor, Silverwing, and Seasmoke, Rhaenyra asks one of her Kingsguard to take a crack at it, and who does she go with? It's Sir Steffon Darkland, and she says that the Darklands have a little Targaryen blood from way back when. They have this big elaborate ceremony where they sing, Seasmoke comes in, he's all chained up, but they're basically trying to get him calm, and they're urging Steffon to be calm but confident, etc. and so forth. But in any case, Seasmoke lets loose the fire, everybody burns, and one of those dragon handlers, as they're burning alive, they just slash their own throat to avoid the pain. It's a pretty gnarly scene, but for people who have accused this show of being a little uneventful in between the big battles, that at least gave them a little carnage to satisfy their bloodlust. But when it comes to Daemon and his storylines, even though I've been a little frustrated this season with his lack of activity compared to his basically taking one castle after another in the book, but we see a few interesting dreams this episode where he gets to reconnect with Viserys, which allows the audience at a minimum to reconnect with Paddy Considine. And Paddy Considine was my favorite part of season 1. I thought he just knocked it out of the park. The character of Viserys in the book is pretty boring and pretty lackluster and kind of a buffoon, and somehow Paddy Considine just made him like the heart and soul of the show. And a lot of people said that they don't like the show as much without him. So at least this episode, they got a little bit more of him. But we see that he's still pissed off, at least in the dream, about his brother Daemon making the dismissive comment about his, I guess it would have been Daemon's nephew who died a day after being born, you know, king for a day or heir for a day, etc. and so forth. And I love that one bit where Daemon's like, "You're still mad about that line?" But Daemon finally decides he's had enough of Harrenhal and the curses and the weird dreams, etc. He's about to fly off and just say, fuck it. But Alice Rivers takes him aside and says, look, just chill for a couple days. The winds are about to shift, and I'm just going to jump ahead to when we see that the winds have in fact shifted, because toward the end of the episode, we learn that Lord Grover Tully is finally dead, and that young Oscar is now the Lord of the Riverlands. And apparently, according to the report, you know, Alice Rivers applied her skills to the best of her ability, trying to keep Lord Grover alive. But obviously, while Alice seems to be enjoying kind of tormenting Daemon with all these dreams and visions and basically all these mysterious predictions and whatnot, she clearly is working on his side to some degree, at least as far as gaining him a few allies is concerned. But as we saw in the teaser for the next week's episode, the Riverlands are in a state of total chaos because of Daemon, and it's going to be his job to wrangle all these warring factions so that he can finally march on King's Landing. And we got a few scattered scenes which kind of felt random or kind of felt like non sequiturs, but if you know where those characters are headed, then it makes sense that they're getting so much screen time. But one of those scenes would be involving Ulf the White, at least the bastard who claims to have a little Targaryen blood, who's drinking in the tavern in King's Landing. And it's through him we hear about some of the food shortages and how the city's starting to kind of boil over with frustration, which is in part due to the white worm basically like doing everything she can to kind of sow the seeds for unrest in the city, while Rhaenyra's delivering food to the people and basically causing like food riots. It's helping feed people, but they're also increasingly angry at Aemond and so on and so forth, even though, as Aemond points out, it's because of Rhaenyra's blockade that they're starving, and yet Rhaenyra's feeding them, and so it's like she's kind of giving with one hand and taking away with another. But anyway, the small folk, they're simple people. They just want to have their food. And along those lines, we got a few scenes with Hugh the Hammer gathering up some of that food for his starving daughter. But I don't want to say anything more about Ulf the White and Hugh right now, but it just, suffice to say, they're going to be major characters moving forward. So get used to the sight of them. But in spite of this episode feeling a little uneventful overall, we did see Rhaenyra taking a few more kind of overt, deliberate actions on several fronts. At one point, we saw her bitch slap the shit out of one of her advisors, saying that it's her fault that he has forgotten to fear her. So that was a good scene. And she picks up a sword, and you can tell she's not necessarily all that familiar with it, but the white worm tells her that she looks good with it. And they're basically plotting and scheming about how to turn the people of King's Landing against Aemond, because it's very hard for Aemond to wage war abroad if his city is turning against them. And we also got a full-blown makeout scene between the two of them, which was totally random. I mean, that came out of nowhere, but I'll take it. This show has been very light or very sparing when it comes to any sort of sexuality or nudity of any kind. So if we end up getting like a full-blown, anyway, if we get a romantic scene between them later in the season, I won't kick. Bring it on. I'm very curious to see what that scene would be all about. And we also got some major scenes involving Alan of Hull and his brother Adam, and we see how Adam is shaving his head, and obviously at this point he's trying to disguise his parentage. As everybody has gathered, he is the bastard son of Corlys Velaryon, and in the book, some people thought he might have been the bastard son of Laenor Velaryon, but we all know that Laenor, let's just say that he prefers company with the fellas as opposed to the young ladies, and so Adam very carefully has been hiding his parentage or his bloodline. But I guess his brother Alan, I don't know if he's dyeing it or he just doesn't have the silver hair. But in any case, Adam's been invited to sail with Corlys as his first mate. Initially, he's a little reluctant, but he's like, well, am I being requested or ordered, etc.? But he reluctantly accepts the post. And we get a major scene with Alan, because after Seasmoke rejected the rider that they were trying to kind of foist upon him, Seasmoke just flew off to Driftmark to go raise some hell, and just happened to bump into Alan and buzzed him and kind of chased him around. But as we saw in the trailer for the next episode, or the teaser for the next episode, Rhaenyra and Alan have a face-off. She's like, who the hell are you? Why are you riding that dragon? And so on and so forth. But this is going to be the beginning of Alan of Hull, who may or may not enjoy a name change at a certain point, being a major character moving forward. And I'll just say that Alan, if they can capture half of his good deeds or his impressive deeds from the book later on, he'll end up being a huge fan favorite. But I'm just taking a quick scan of my notes, and I realize I've totally forgotten to talk about the scenes involving Aegon. And poor Aegon, I mean, he's got a broken leg. As Larys tells him, he will never run again. Half his body's covered in all those horrible burns. And at one point we see the maesters peeling off the dead skin and the burned skin, almost like a snake shedding its skin. I mean, it was really, really gnarly. But Aemond pays his brother a visit at one point. It's kind of painful, and he's acting like he's very concerned about his health and welfare. But as we learn, Aegon's basically asleep for 9 out of every 10 hours of the day. They're using milk of the poppy to dull the pain. But Larys, a.k.a. Clubfoot, who gets kind of humiliated by Aemond at one point in the episode, he and Aemond are talking about how Aemond needs to name his own Hand of the King, because Cole obviously was Hand for Aegon. And Aemond uses that moment to kind of tease that Larys might be a choice, and then he snatches it away and tells him to send for Otto Hightower. And at that point, Larys, you can tell, he's like, well, fuck this Aemond guy. I'm going to go work my magic on Aegon. But then Larys starts sharing some stories about how his father accused somebody of witchcraft when Larys was born because of his deformed, twisted foot. And he says that people are going to underestimate you moving forward, but that when people underestimate you, you can turn that to your advantage. And we see Aegon, in spite of the fact that he's just in agonizing pain, a little confused due to the milk of the poppy, he asks Larys for help. So this is the beginning of a very interesting alliance between Aegon and Larys, which will obviously pay some interesting dividends in the story down the road. But for folks craving a little bit more action, we at least got to see a little societal unrest in King's Landing when Helena and Allison go to the church to pray, and they're told, we need to get the fuck out of here right now. And they come outside, they're getting food thrown at them. Suddenly, the mob just moves in. One of the Kingsguard ends up getting killed after one of the Smallfolk gets their arm chopped off. And Allison's trying to get everybody to sheath their blades, but it's hard to keep your blade sheathed when hundreds of people are throwing food at you and threatening to rip you to pieces. But what it reminded me a little bit of it was some of those scenes with Joffrey. I think it was in season 2 of Game of Thrones when Tyrion had to slap the shit out of him for basically inflaming the Smallfolk of King's Landing. So yeah, whoever's in power in King's Landing, so they're always ruling right on the edge of a knife, where at any given time, King's Landing can boil over into some serious unrest. In any event, in the preview for next week's episode, we got some interesting teases. We hear that Otto Hightower's on the march with Daeron Targaryen on Dragonback. There was one conversation about Daeron between Alicent and Gwaine, and she was basically asking about her son that she never sees because he was brought up in Old Town. But Daeron's 16 years old now. He has a dragon, and he will be marching forth with Otto Hightower, making them a very formidable army. As I mentioned before, we see Rhaenyra and Alan of Hull will have a little face-off. And then we also see that Rhaenyra's hosting tryouts, and I think that was for Vermithor, but maybe it was for Silverwing. But Vermithor is nearly as big as Vhagar. So whoever successfully tries out to ride Vermithor, that should be an interesting scene. Next episode, and we hear that Jace is worried that Targaryens will be considered less than the godlike people that they are if anybody can ride a dragon. But more on that after next week's episode. But before I wrap up, I want to ask a question or offer a theory for people who have read ahead in Fire and Blood and might have some answers on this front. But this is major spoilers from the book that goes further than where the show is right now. So if you don't want any spoilers from the book at all, bail out now. Thank you so much for watching. I greatly appreciate it. But my question is, and one last warning, because sometimes people say, I'm listening, and then you say spoilers, but then you don't give me time to pause. And last warning, 1, 2, 3. But my question is the character of Rhaena Targaryen basically being folded in with and combined with the character of Nettles, who is a huge character from Fire and Blood, who ends up riding the dragon, Sheepstealer? Because we saw this episode where she encounters that field of all the burnt bones of sheep, and as we all know from the book, Sheepstealer is fond of mutton. That's how he got his name, Sheepstealer. But he's a wild dragon, and in the book, one of the coolest scenes is Nettles, who is one of the Smallfolk. She uses food to slowly but surely, basically make Sheepstealer accustomed to her presence on a daily basis. And after, days and if not weeks, she slowly but surely gets the courage to get on top of him. And she ends up becoming one of the more badass dragon riders for Team Black and becomes one of the key allies for Daemon. And if Nettles is not going to be in the show, that definitely changes some of the sources of friction between Daemon and Rhaenyra later on, when some rumors start to spread that perhaps Nettles and Daemon might have some sort of affair going on. And obviously, it's unlikely that Daemon and Rhaena would go that way. But once again, we're talking about Targaryens and Velaryons and that sort of thing. Who knows what might happen, but I have a hard time believing that they would not make Rhaena the rider of Sheepstealer by including that scene with all the sheep bones. But apparently this is a pretty popular fan theory that people had been kind of circulating before the season even begun. But what do y'all think? Because I feel like Nettles is not a major character, but she's a cool character. But obviously with a show with as many speaking roles as this, Rhaena basically falls out of the story for, huge chunks of time before she finally comes back in toward the end of the Dance of the Dragons. It'd be a way of keeping her character in the mix at the by sacrificing yet another one. It'd be, a departure from the book, not a major departure, but it would change some of the dynamic of Daemon's, questions about loyalty later on down the road. Because one of my favorite moments in the book Fire and Blood is when Daemon hears that people are accusing him and Nettles of being together. And he realizes, oh shit, Team Black's not really my team anymore. And he encourages Nettles to fly away. And he basically resigns himself to facing Aemond and throwing down, come what may, whether he lives or dies. And it's just a great, big, awesome hero moment. They will have to totally rework that if he's basically teaming up with his daughter flying around. So I'll be very curious to see how that story unfolds, because anytime you make a change, it's like dropping a big stone into a lake. It sends out ripples, and those ripples will have an impact on future chapters. So more to come on that, but let me know what you think down in the comments below. But I think that's all I've got to say about this week's episode, so thank you so much for sticking with me. I greatly appreciate it. Please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, hitting that notification bell. Hope everybody has an amazing week, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.